Now on Inside California Politics, if you signed a petition to recall Governor Newsom, a new campaign is asking you to take it back.
And by this fall, dozens of candidates may be running for Governor Newsom's seat.
The question is that if Caitlyn Jenner decides to run, and she's clearly considering it, could she have the same impact?
What reality star Caitlyn Jenner's campaign might look like.
Plus, a new bill to decriminalize the possession of some psychedelic drugs is making its way through the state Senate. Why the bill's author says it could help to prevent drug abuse, not enable it.
Broadcasting across the Golden State, this is Inside California Politics.
Thanks for joining us for Inside California Politics. I'm Frank Buckley in Los Angeles.
And I'm Nikki Lorenzo in Sacramento. As efforts to recall Governor Newsom gain momentum, a former state senator is leading a new campaign aimed at removing names from the recall petition.
But his campaign is running out of time as the deadline for county registrars to verify signatures is April 29th. Inside California Politics talked to former State Senate Pro Tem Don Perata.
Don Perata, thanks for your time today. So you're leading this new campaign. It's called Stop the Steal California, to try to get people who signed the recall petition to now remove their names from that recall petition. You've had a long, successful career. You look comfortable there in that chair. Why involve yourself in this right now?
Well, you sit around a lot and you watch things happen, and occasionally something just jumps out at you. And from the very beginning of this recall, something didn't seem right. And the more I looked into it, I was talking to some of the people that I've used to work with, we found the same thing, that this is the only thing in state government where the right to know does not apply. If you sign a petition at a supermarket to ban sugar, put that on the ballot, I can find that out, who you are, and I can campaign to you. I can try to dissuade you. When you do a recall, no such thing. For some reason, those signatures are shrouded. So it becomes a little like a star chamber. And the more you look into that, the more you begin to question, well, why can't the governor face his accusers the same way anybody else would in our system? So we decided to think about going after him, and sure enough, we came up with a legal basis for doing what we're doing. A constitutional amendment was passed when I was in the legislature. Actually, I was chairing the committee. That was basically open government, public right to know, and it would supersede the statute that says that these should be secret signatures. So all we want to do is get them, take a look at who signed them, make sure that they're not having an easy time getting these signatures. They had to ask for a 120-day extension. So we would need a lot of signatures to remove this thing from the ballot. And the question always comes up, well, why do it? What's wrong with the recall? Well, everything. That would be my answer. After all, California's gone through it almost 2 years. We don't need the equivalent of a cafeteria food fight in November. This governor has got a lot of things to do. I personally think he's done them very well under the circumstances without a playbook. So let's get over this. So you got a handful of people that are discontented. They got people to sign this thing probably at a time that people were angry because their stores were closed, their kids were home, things were very confused. But we're over that now. We're recovering.
Well, the names and information of the people who did sign the petition are private under current law. So how are you contacting or communicating with these Californians who have signed the petition?
Well, we did sort of the perfunctory thing, the good government thing. We asked the proponents to give us the signatures, and they responded like we knew they would. But you always want to check every box. Now we have to decide whether or not we want to go to the Secretary of State and formally ask for and apply for a Public Record Act to give us those signatures. If she says no, then our next option would be to go to the courts. And we're pretty confident that if we did that, we would get the signatures to look at. We're not going to cancel the recall. That's a second step. That's a further step, because we would still have to appeal to those voters and try to get them to remove their signatures for one reason or another. One thing is for sure, we do not need 500,000 signatures to be rescinded. I think they're very close to just making it right now. So if we got a handful, we might be able to do it. You could always ask for a recount. These proponents have had a pretty easy walk for the last 9 months. It's time for somebody to look at them and say, all right, let's play by the rules. Of course, they say that their secretiveness is okay, that we're trying to intimidate them. Well, nowhere else in state or federal government is this allowed. It shouldn't be allowed here. It's an anomaly of law. It's a fluke.
Less than 2 weeks now before the deadline to verify those signatures. Is this not just a political exercise here?
No, so what happens after the deadline of the 29th happens, then it opens up a period of time from May 10th to June 21st. That's the window that individuals can rescind their signature. So we actually have not a lot of time, don't get me wrong, but it is, we're playing by the rules. Those are the rules. And if we get, if everything lines up, fine. If not, no harm, no foul. We're going to have a recall election. I think the entire state's going to get punished because we're going to have to fool around with this nonsense rather than do real things. But that is also out of my reach.
You could have called this anything. You're choosing to call it Stop the Steal California. Obviously, Stop the Steal is the phrase used by Trump supporters in their failed effort to convince people that Joe Biden's victory was not legitimate. Obviously, that was a falsehood. Why did you choose the same phrase, and who's funding your campaign?
Well, we chose the phrase just because it was ironic. The difference is they thought that there was a conspiracy, underground movement in about 12 different states to steal ballots. That's not what's going on here. What's going on here is you got a handful of people that took an opportunity, a political opportunity, to do something. And like I would do with any other thing I've done in my career, if I think it's destructive, I'm going to try to do something about it. So it's not a political exercise. We have opened up an Act Blue account. We have people. You don't have to provide any information unless there's a $5,000 or greater donation. We haven't hit that benchmark yet, but we don't. There's no big money out there. We're not getting no governor from Arkansas sent us $250,000. We'll probably have to get it the old-fashioned way. All the big money is going to go into the recall itself.
Coming up on Inside California Politics, will she or won't she? What Caitlyn Jenner's campaign for governor could look like, and who might support her bid. If we do see a recall election this fall, Governor Newsom could face dozens of opponents vying for his job. And according to an Axios report, one of those potential candidates could be Caitlyn Jenner. 71-year-old Jenner has considered running for office before, but now sources close to her say this could be the real deal. Joining us this week inside the bullpen is LA Times political reporter Seema Mehta and reporter Blake Montgomery with the Daily Beast. Seema, Blake, great to have you both inside the bullpen. So this past week, Caitlyn Jenner tweeted that she was pretty much praising the efforts of the recall here in California. Seema, I know you wrote an article saying that she is eyeing a run. Are we seeing some deja vu here? Is this 2003 all over again?
I think that's a big question on everybody's mind because during the 2003 recall, while Governor Gray Davis at the time was less popular than Governor Newsom is now, there was a real question about would they center around, would they get, all mesh or coalesce behind a candidate to replace him? And that really wasn't happening until Arnold Schwarzenegger got in the race, which was just sort of a groundbreaking moment. I mean, he sucked all the oxygen out of the room. He was so well known. The question is that if Caitlyn Jenner decides to run, and she's clearly considering it, could she have the same impact? And I think we're really waiting to see what her next steps are. She's assembled a team. She's obviously, some of them have started, reaching out to the media. You're seeing some leaks here and there. So I think that, the question is, can she run a campaign like Governor Schwarzenegger did if she in fact decides to run?
Blake, you recently wrote a piece too about the team that Caitlyn is assembling, and these are some consultants and fundraisers that are tied to the Trump campaign, right?
Exactly right, and they're not Trump kind of behind-the-scenes figures. These are controversial, well-known figures, like Caroline Wren is a well-known Republican fundraiser, high dollar fundraiser, also one of the organizers of the rally that preceded the January 6th Capitol riot, which that can only be a liability if Jenner does decide to run. And Trump himself is deeply unpopular in California. And the other advisor that she's contracted is former Trump campaign manager Brad Parscale, who left the campaign in somewhat of a disgrace under very like controversial and murky circumstances involving his wife and allegations there. So she's assembled a team that indicates she would be running possibly on a MAGA platform. We have yet to see, but given who her advisors are, they're well-known Republican figures.
Yeah, Seema, and a MAGA ticket not popular here in California.
I think you have to look at it two different ways. Well, first of all, I mean, if you look at Caitlyn Jenner's relationship with President Trump, it's varied over the years. I mean, in the 2016 election, she was a supporter. He basically said, and this is at a time when all those bathroom bills were coming up in various state legislatures. He basically said, she can use any restroom she wants at one of my properties. And so she went to one of his properties and used the ladies' room and filmed herself coming out saying, "Thanks, Donald." But then by 2018, she voted for him in 2016. But by 2018, she wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post saying that she made a mistake, this was after the administration had pushed a number of policies that were viewed as harmful to the transgender community, including efforts to ban transgender people from serving in the military. And so she basically, in 2018, really strongly disavowed some of his policies and said, "I made a mistake." So the question, I think, is, where does she fall now? And I think, if she does decide to run, that's a clear question she's going to ask. In terms of MAGA being unpopular here, I think they have to look at it two different ways. First of all, obviously, President Trump lost the state incredibly badly, almost 30 points to Joe Biden. So clearly, if you look at California voters overall, that's true. However, he did win the votes of more than 6 million Californians. And so while Republicans are a weaker party in California, there's still a lot of Republicans out here, and they are loyal to Trump. And that's why if you look at all of the Republicans who are officially running so far, the main ones, former San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer, businessman John Cox, former Congressman Doug Osee, they've all expressed varying levels of support for President Trump, since before this campaign or during this campaign. And I think in part that's a reflection that they have to, because if they have any hope of winning, if the vote goes against Newsom and he is recalled, to win the second question, the replacement question, you have to have these candidates would need to have like Republican voters behind them, as well as some independent and Democratic voters. But if they don't have a large chunk of the Republican electorate behind them, then it's really hard to see a path to victory.
And if you look at data from previous recall elections too, Seema, the turnout in terms of Republicans, isn't it greater?
It was. I mean, it was so long ago, and I don't think we have enough evidence or enough elections to really say anything, statistically. But if the Republicans are more energized than Democrats are, then that's certainly the chance. And the question is, where are we going to be if this election, it's not official yet, but it's almost certain to happen. It's likely to happen, towards the end of the year. Where are we going to be then? Like, are schools going to be reopened? Is coronavirus going to seem like a memory, or are we going to be in like another shutdown because there's like some variant that came out? I mean, there's so much that can happen that we don't know. Newsom, if you look at the polling, he's in a stronger position now than Governor Gray Davis was in 2003. And California is obviously much more Democratic now. And Democrats have much more power now. The voters are more liberal and diverse now compared to 2003. So he definitely has some advantages going into this race that Gray Davis did not have 18 years ago. But again, November it's like a lifetime away in politics, and so much could happen between now and then.
And again, here are the candidates who have already announced they are running for California governor: Republican businessman John Cox, former Republican San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer, former Republican Congressman Doug Osee, and also former adult film actress Mary Carey, who placed 10th in the 2003 recall election.
Coming up, new legislation would allow the targets of recalls to see the names of people who are signing petitions trying to fire them. Why the author of this bill says he still supports the recall process.
Elected officials in California facing potential recalls would be allowed to see the names of people who signed petitions against them under new legislation making its way through the state capitol. We talked to the state lawmaker driving this proposed legislation, Senator Josh Newman. Senator Newman, you are no stranger to the recall process here in California. Recalled in 2018, won your seat back in 2020. That being said, let's talk about your intentions for this legislation that you introduced this past week. And are you against the recall process here in California?
I guess that's a good place to start. So, as you say, I'm not a stranger to the recall process, and it may sound ironic, but I'm a believer in not only the recall but the other two provisions, the referendum and the initiative, that give Californians the ability to directly change their government, to remove public officials. So my bill is not meant in any way to weaken the ability to recall a public official. In fact, it's meant to strengthen it by clarifying some provisions within it to make sure that it's transparent and fair as a recall process moves forward.
And specifically, in what ways do you want it to be more transparent?
So, everybody, virtually everybody in California has had the experience of going into a grocery store and encountering a person with a clipboard or sitting at a table with a number of clipboards, who will appeal to them, please sign my petition to do the following. And my experience, but certainly, consistent with lots of other efforts, not always clear to a voter, to that person who's asked to sign, what it is they're signing. And it's not always well represented, the reasons for, a particular effort. And so, unfortunately, the way that the recall mechanics work in California, if you find out later under existing law that you signed something that you either didn't agree with or didn't understand, it's virtually impossible to remove your signature from that petition. Moreover, if you're the target of a recall and you have knowledge that the proponents of that recall are misleading voters to secure their signatures, there's virtually no way for you to then find that voter and apprise them of that fact and ask them to remove their signature. So my bill actually endeavors to do that while protecting the rights of voters and ensuring that nothing else is going to deter an effort to recall a malfeasant or otherwise recallable official.
So the other side, some Republicans came out this week, especially those affiliated with the effort to recall the governor right now. And let's say your legislation does get passed. This would not affect the current, want to point that out, this would not play into the current recall against the governor right now. But the argument is, we live in this charged climate right now when it comes to politics. It seems like we have forgotten how to disagree. So some folks might be a little bit nervous to admit that they might have signed a recall petition because they're upset with the governor about the schools not being open, and they might not want to tell people that they did that. And the other side says this is an invasion of their privacy, that this should be private.
So, I appreciate that. So, and I want to point out, that this bill has zero to do with the current effort to recall the governor. And if it passed, to be clear, it will have no impact on that process. Nor does it have to do with, with my prior experience, except, insofar as I think I learned some things that I think need to be applied. So, to that question about privacy. So the original thinking around, protecting these signatures, actually, in 1912, when it was first passed, had and since it's been modified, actually, had very little to do with that question about, the privacy of the voter. What it had to do with was making sure that people who collected signatures for a particular petition for a particular effort couldn't then reuse that same information to do something else, that wasn't, ethical or, consistent with the voters' participation there. And so I think when people say, that they worry about their privacy being violated, I would point out that in other states, where they have similar provisions for recall, those petitions are not private there. The state of Michigan is a good example. And I think we need to make a distinction. When you vote, your vote is secret. The secret ballot is kind of a sacrament of American political governance. But, the kinds of advocacy that takes place in a campaign to do lots of things, including, to prospectively recall a sitting public official, that's a public process. That's part of politics. And to your point, people are very polarized, and it's gotten very contentious. And I guess I appreciate, there's the concern, but there are very deliberate provisions in this bill to not only protect how this information would be used, but there's really explicit provisions that would prevent and assign penalties, fairly severe penalties, to anybody who used this information to retaliate or otherwise harass somebody who'd signed a petition.
Next on Inside California Politics, the fight to decriminalize certain psychedelics is making its way through the state Senate. Why the author of that bill says it's a step towards ending the war on drugs. 2 California cities have decriminalized the possession of certain psychedelics like magic mushrooms, and a new Senate bill by State Senator Scott Wiener would expand that legislation for the entire state. We asked State Senator Wiener why he believes the legislation is needed.
The bill covers psychedelic drugs, various drugs such as mushrooms and mescaline. It includes MDMA. And the drugs that are included are all drugs that increasingly the evidence shows have significant benefits for mental health and addiction. These are drugs that people, particularly combat veterans who are supporting this bill, they use for PTSD, depression, addiction to heroin, which it can help with.
We also asked Senator Wiener about criticism from opponents who say his bill would increase drug abuse.
Prohibition doesn't work. It didn't work with alcohol. It didn't work with cannabis. It doesn't work with psychedelics or other drugs. All it does is make it harder for people to be safe. It makes it harder for people to get treatment. It makes it harder for people to talk about it. So let's bring it out of the shadows into the sunlight, take a health-based approach, and help people live good lives.
Next, the bill goes to the Senate Appropriations Committee. If it survives there, it would go to a vote by the full Senate in late May. You can see more of our interview with Senator Scott Wiener and others online. Just head to your local station's website.
Thanks for joining us for Inside California Politics. We will see you back here next weekend.